to back today.
Sounds good. Yeah, it'll be a minute or two. Good morning, folks. I am monitoring our participant list and it's ticking up. I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes here. My asks are, and it looks like everybody's doing this, but as you come in, if you could just mute your line. The top half of our agenda is more presentation. The second half of our agenda is more discussion based. And so when we get to the discussion, I'd love for folks to come off mute, and if you're in a place to come on to video, awesome. If not, I fully understand that too. So whatever keeps you comfortable. Erin and Andrea, can you just remind me who's running the slide deck?
Andrea will be.
I am. Andrea? Okay, so I'll try to remember to cue you, Andrea, when I need a slide advanced.
That sounds good, and I'll do my best to anticipate that correctly for you as well.
All right, folks, we're going to give it just another minute or so, and then get started. All right, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. I know we're still waiting for Governor and First Lady. I don't see them on. Oh, actually, I just see them jumping on. So great. That was the one name I was looking for that I did. I know we've got a number of. All right, good morning, everybody. I am really excited to be able to welcome everybody this morning. And I just want to confirm from Erin or Andrea that you can hear me okay. All right, perfect. Well, I would like to start this morning by just thanking all of you for taking time out of your schedules to be here today and also rolling with our rescheduling this date. Really appreciate whatever shuffling you needed to do. I know that there are going to be some folks that need to pop in and out of this meeting today, but we do appreciate the time you can spend with us. I also want to remind folks that this is an open meeting and it's being simultaneously broadcast on YouTube this morning. It will also be archived and put onto our Leadership Council on Early Years website for future viewing. So just want people to be aware of that. And then finally, there is going to be some presentation this morning and then some discussion on the later half of the meeting. And so really want to invite people to, when we get to the discussion part, unmute. If you're in a place where you can jump on video, awesome. If not, that's okay too. Whatever makes you feel most comfortable this morning. And we do appreciate your participation. So just a little refresher on what is Leadership Council on Early Years, because I think that this will help folks who weren't able to attend the last meeting kind of get their grounding. So the folks on the call today, and we decided not to do a roll call today because there are people kind of coming and going, and we've got a lot to pack in to our agenda this morning, but I think it'll become clear who's on the call as we get into our discussion. I would ask that if you've got a question or if you are going to participate in the discussion, if you would just give your name and then say which agency you represent. But the Leadership Council on Early Years is intended to be kind of a think tank and a dot connecting tool around children and family policy, really across the board. Also, by the designs of our Preschool Development grant, the Leadership Council on Early Years functions as a critical engagement partner as part of that grant process. And we'll get into kind of how all of you will interface with that process as I march through these slides. I'm going to ask you to wear a couple of hats today in this meeting and in future meetings. So number one, you're here because you're a policy dot connector. You're here because you likely administer a program or programs that impact children or their families. And you got to think about that in the broad sense. So I've got this quote that I love, and Marcel Proust is the attributed person who said this, but he said, "The real voyage of discovery consists of not seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And I really see this as a group of folks who can help provide those new eyes, those new looks to children and family policy, because so many of us touch on programs that really play in that space. So I want you to think about your work through that lens and become that valuable dot connector around children and family policy. Second, I'm going to ask you to wear your executive leader hat today. So we collectively manage across all of our departments really a significant piece of the Wisconsin workforce. Today, I'm going to ask you to think about how challenges in the childcare sector specifically have potentially impacted your workforce or the workforce of a sector that you work closely with. I know I've talked to a lot of folks on this meeting about the impact that COVID has had on childcare, and then conversely, the impact childcare has had on folks' ability to work. Thirdly, I know that some of you in this meeting are parents yourselves, and I would really invite you to wear this hat in our conversations as well. I think all of those hats are going to be really important to the conversation that we're going to have today. So if you're asking yourself why you're here, I hope that one of those three hats fits on your head. So at our first meeting in February, if you weren't able to join us, we looked at whole family solutions through the lens of United Community Center, who hosted us. And they're this amazing entity out of Milwaukee. They go by UCC. And those of us who were able to be there discussed how our agencies could better coordinate and collaborate, braid funding and programming together to make it easier for places like UCC to provide cradle to really the old age services. Today, this meeting is intended to accomplish two goals. And we can switch to the agenda slide, Andrea. So the meeting today is intended to, number one, first we're going to get a refresher on the state of the childcare industry and our preschool development grant work. And again, the Leadership Council on Early Years role in helping us deliver on our grant priorities. The second part of this meeting is intended to highlight the intersecting work of multiple agencies at the nexus of childcare and workforce development, economic development, and then some of the coordinating work done by the Office of Children's Mental Health over the last year. So of particular note in today's conversation is going to be the disproportionate impact that childcare accessibility and affordability has had on women in the workforce. And the article that I sent around to all of you in advance of the call really reflects that crisis moment that we're in for women in the workforce. We are going to review both the minutes from this meeting and the minutes from last meeting at our next LECE meeting, which we anticipate we will have later this fall or early into the new year. Finally, I want to tickle on two questions that I'm going to ask you when we get to discussion. And this is really an effort to get you thinking through these presentations about how to begin a discussion around childcare policy. So I just want you to kind of put those new eyes on and say, I wonder if anyone has ever thought about trying blank. Or I wonder if anyone is doing blank. Okay, if you just kind of jot some ideas down as you're listening to Missy and Caleb and Linda talk through some of these pieces, as you're listening to Erin Arango Escalante, my division administrator, and Andrea Camilleri, who works closely with the Preschool Development Program, just be thinking about, I wonder if anyone has thought about trying this. I wonder if anyone is doing this as a way to start to spur our conversation. I'm also going to ask you to hold any questions that you have for any of these mini presentations until we get to the end. I worry if we don't kind of keep time through the presentations, it'll just eat up all of our discussion time. And I find the discussions at these meetings particularly valuable. There are folks who are listening really intently for nuggets in this conversation that are going to lead to our next steps on preschool development. Andrea, if you could click to the next slide. So to segue into, next slide, thanks. To segue into preschool development, just want to remind people, so this is the $10 million grant that we were proud to secure in December of 2019 when COVID was nay a glimmer on the horizon. And we were focused and are still focused on this purpose, this charge, that all Wisconsin families will have access to high quality, affordable, local early care and education opportunities by the year 2023. That is a lofty goal, but I'm here to tell you that the players in this conversation from the early care and education perspective have never been more united behind a goal. Grant work that we're doing, coalitions we're building, foundations that are funding work in Wisconsin are all working on behalf of this goal. So that's a good place to be. Next slide, Andrea. So our preschool development grant lays out a pretty prescriptive series of steps for year one because this is a planning grant. We fully intend to apply for a year 2 and 3 implementation grant, but we need to really nail the planning grant in order to secure those implementation funds. Right now, we are between step 3 and step 4. We've completed our listening sessions. Some of you attended one of those listening sessions, and we thank you for doing that. And we are crunching through some of that data. You'll hear a little bit about the outputs of the listening session process today. And we are just getting ready to launch our strategic planning process and review process. So we're really between steps 3 and 4. Next slide. And the Leadership Council on Early Years role in our current steps, again, this was a critical part of getting this grant, was to establish a council like this that really represents state agencies and other affiliate agencies that have a touch to this. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time making sure that LECE, as we call it, is engaged in step 3 and step 4 of this process. So with that, to dig into, I think next slide, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. To dig a little deeper into sort of the childcare landscape and then more specifically our preschool development work, I'd like to invite Erin Arango Escalante, Division Administrator of Division of Early Care and Education, to kick us off and keep us going. Thanks, Erin.
All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you all for being here. I am going to talk with you this morning about really the landscape of childcare, and I'll even broaden out to say early care and education. So really thinking about all of the early care and education programs that are in Wisconsin. It's everything from Head Start to childcare to 4-year-old kindergarten to home visiting programs, early childhood special ed, birth to 3. I could keep going and going and going. So we're going to talk about where we're at from that space. Next slide, please. So the visual that's on your screen is something that we have shared a lot. And this is the framework for how we as a state are going to collectively transform early care and education so that we can meet that goal of by 2023 that all Wisconsin families will have access to high quality, affordable early care and education opportunities that meet the needs of their family. And so I want to just remind us where we are, remind us of this framework and really where we were pre-COVID and where we are now. I think it's important to just understand that landscape. And so our framework starts within the context of equity and inclusion. And everything that we think about, whether it's access, affordability, quality, or workforce, is really important to keep that perspective in mind. It is a thread that runs throughout. It is not something that's separate, but rather something that is inherent and very much a part of. And so when we think about specific policies and practices and who we have at the table when developing those practices and how we are including our stakeholders, our advocates, our policymakers, et cetera, it is important that we keep that perspective in mind. We do not want to have unintended consequences as we look to move the needle in all of these areas: access, affordability, quality, and workforce. It's very, very important. So I'm going to start right now in just focusing on access. Now, I'll mention it is difficult to focus just in one of these areas, is that they are all actually very intertwined. So it does get difficult, but I do want to try to simplify this, knowing it's a complex topic. So when we talk about access, you may have heard us talk about previously 54% of the zip codes in our state were considered child care deserts. And what that means is that there is one spot available for every 3 children in a zip code. That is how we define child care deserts. And historically, like I said, 54% of our state was considered a child care desert. Now, that is not atypical of other states. It is a common, we see that a lot. And in fact, 80% of our rural zip codes are considered child care deserts. This was in February of 2020. We had 4,500 programs roughly that were available and about 172 slots for children. And that starts at birth and goes up to age 13. I will fast forward just a tiny bit and think about March, April, May, when we were in the time when schools were closed, when we were just beginning to understand COVID-19 and its implications. And essentially, we saw a pretty big decrease in the number of available programs. And this is across the board, from Head Start to 4-year-old kindergarten programs, et cetera. In childcare, we saw a decrease to about 2,500 programs. But what's interesting, and this makes sense, is that we saw a decrease, significant decrease in large group childcare programs, but not as much of a decrease in our in-home family childcare providers. So those who are providing care in-home in a smaller setting. It makes sense. Parents wanted to be thoughtful of how many children were with, how many other children were with their children. And so it makes a lot of sense. So we saw a decrease with the input of childcare counts, our COVID-19 emergency childcare payments. We have begun to move the needle in this space back up. So we're beginning to see the impact of additional funding to be able to support our childcare programs. Let's just touch on affordability. I will say 2 things. Childcare is expensive, and not because childcare providers are making money. They run on razor thin margins. For affordability, we know that it is more than in-state college tuition for infant and child care. It is about, on average, 49% of the average family's income is childcare. It's expensive. And again, as I mentioned, it is not because childcare providers are making money. They're running on razor-thin margins. Roughly 80% of their salary goes to, or 80% of their budget goes to salaries. Now, when we add on things such as PPE, other sanitation practices, et cetera, that margin even diminishes. So just looking at affordability, quality. Over the past roughly 7 years, we have seen roughly 80% of providers participating in our quality rating and improvement system, Youngstar. As you can imagine, our providers that are participating in Youngstar, which is based on a 1 to 5 star rating, we've seen a decrease, A, in participation, and B, a decrease in going from 5 stars to 4 stars, 4 stars to 3 stars, 3 stars to 2 stars, primarily because of the next topic, which is workforce. So on average, childcare providers make roughly a little more than $10 an hour. 53% of our childcare providers are receiving public assistance because of the low wages and minimal, if any, benefits and compensation. We see a turnover rate of close to 40%. And the situation, the COVID-19 situation, has exacerbated our workforce dilemma. What I will say again is the child care codes COVID-19, both emergency and supplemental payments have really helped us move the needle in these spaces, access, affordability, quality, and workforce. And I truly believe, and as crazy as this sounds, that there is a real opportunity for early care and education right now, given the pandemic. There is a lot of attention nationally, statewide, and locally to be able to support early care and education. And there are, and we'll hear about this too, business leaders that are wanting to collaborate, wanting to coordinate and work together. And others are unusual allies, wanting to connect the dots to support our children so that we can ultimately continue to reopen Wisconsin's economy and really truly support the children and families who are in need. So although I painted a gloom picture of where we are, we're moving in the right direction. We have a ways to go. And I really, truly believe that now is that opportunity. So thank you. Next, we're going to turn it over to talk specifically about the Preschool Development Grant. And Emily foreshadowed for you where we are in the process and where we are headed with this grant, knowing that this strategic plan and needs assessment, et cetera, that we are sharing isn't just a PDG thing. It's just not for Preschool Development Grant. This strategic plan is connecting the dots across all of the work we are doing in this space. We have a number of other grants. We have a number of other initiatives. And this is the core plan that connects all of the pieces together. So it's critical that we look at it from our various perspectives and how they intersect with the work that you are doing. So I want to introduce Andrea Camilleri. She is our PDG Strategic Initiatives Advisor and has been very instrumental in working on our Preschool Development Grant with our number of other colleagues who are also on the line. And so she is going to share the process that we have taken and where we need your input. Andrea. And Andrea, just so you know, we can't hear you.
Okay, thank you, Erin, and thank you all for this opportunity to spend a little time this morning talking with you about the work of our Preschool Development Grant. We'll only be able to touch the surface, and there's a lot more that I hope we can explore together moving forward. So first of all, today, I want to introduce to you this idea of a preschool development sandbox. Emily talked about the various steps of our grant. In step 2, was our needs assessment, which we have been very busy with over the last several months. We've been engaged in a lot of data collection, evaluating the status of our landscape pre-COVID and post-COVID, as Erin just described for you. And you can find the results of all of this data digging on our webpage under the heading of Preschool Development Grant Sandbox. So just as children learn best through play, adults also need to dig, explore, try out different tools, and have the information at their fingertips to be able to notice trends, find answers to their questions, encounter new information that challenges their existing understandings, and dream up new opportunities to grow and address all of the different challenges that we've already heard about today. So this Preschool Development Sandbox was launched this summer in July. It currently includes several different interactive data dashboards looking at the county and regional level. So we look at some indicators for health, employment, education, and poverty, which have a significant impact, of course, on the field of early care and education. And then you see interactive county data related to that preschool development grant framework that Erin just talked about in the areas of access, affordability, quality, and workforce. So you'll see a lot of different information on that, and I'll show you some more of it today. You will also see some regional snapshots if you want to zoom in and get a summary of what's going on in the north, northeast, southeast, south, or western regions of our state, and some PowerPoint slides should you need or want to bring any of this data and information to a meeting or group that you are working with. We invite you to grab some of those slides and use them for yourself. So here's an example of the different dashboards that you will see in the PDG Sandbox. I'm just showing two different screenshots of them. There are several more, and this is just zooming in on one county in our state, and you can select any county and find all of this information by county across the whole state. We will be finalizing the remaining components of our needs assessment soon, and that includes the summary of our listening sessions that we have been conducting for the past several months, talking with different stakeholders from across the state, including some of you who had the opportunity to join us, and we're grateful for that. So I'll spend the rest of the time this morning going through some of the findings from our listening sessions. We are just in the process of finalizing the report that will be coming out in the next few days on our website, so you can be watching for that shortly, especially if you're subscribed to our PDG newsletter. That will be announced soon. So at a high level, I'll just help you understand the format and the process for the virtual regional listening sessions. Of course, we had intended for these to be face-to-face events all throughout the state, and we had a robust schedule ready to go, but then COVID-19 happened. And so we had to shift into a virtual format. And so the data that I'll show you today does not include the data from those first few listening sessions that we did hold face-to-face in different towns around the state. But you will find that data summarized in our final report as well. So just for today, I'll focus on the virtual regional listening sessions. And we held 2 of those per region for each of the 5 regions for a total of 10 virtual listening sessions. In addition, we had 1 Spanish language listening session that was a statewide session that had 29 participants involved who shared with us their information. And then we also held 2 tribal listening sessions for citizens of our First Nations. So within just the first 10 regional listening sessions, we had 420, at least 420 unique participants, and 31 repeat participants. And again, I want to underscore that that's just the people who introduced themselves, shared their names. There were many other people who joined the sessions and were kind of coming and going, and we weren't able to capture their data in the notes. So you get a sense here on your screen of where these folks were coming from. Obviously, the vast majority were from childcare personnel, with some other large groups from government staff, including our DCF staff, participants. That does not include the staff who were working the events, but those who chose to attend and participate, and a lot of other different early care and education sector organizations had a good presence in these meetings. So I'll quickly share with you some of the findings. So on our first question of what does quality early care and education mean to you and members of your community, we were able to summarize the responses people gave into 3 main categories. The provider category is the one that came up most frequently. And so people defined quality in terms of the type of education or academics that were offered in programs. They talked about things like school readiness, developmental appropriateness, that it was play-based and focused on the whole child. There were also a lot of references to descriptions of the child care setting and the environment that the children were in, the staff qualifications to serve children, and that the program was culturally responsive, diverse, and representative of the community. So these are the things that mattered a lot to folks in terms of the program or provider that they chose and the environments and settings that their children are in. The second highest set of responses fell in the well-being category, which includes references to social, emotional health and development of children, the social interactions that they're able to engage in, the preparedness of providers to offer trauma-informed care, to engage with families and partner with families, to form rich and strong relationships between the families and the teacher and the child. So this category had a lot of comments about trust, infant mental health, as well as culture, and being able to advance those equity concerns that we know we have across our state. And last, in the middle of your screen, we have the community category. And folks in this category define quality in terms of access, affordability, and other challenges or concerns that their community may have. They also talked a lot about high quality being supported by community connections with businesses, community leaders, and the workforce. So if they felt that support, then the quality would increase. So this theme suggests that quality in some cases isn't the most relevant factor in families' decision-making about early care and education as much as we might wish it would be, when in fact decisions around childcare for most Wisconsin families come down to issues of access and affordability first and foremost. Next, I'll segue to question 2 from our listening sessions, where we asked, do you think quality early care and education exists in your community? And if so, can families access and afford it? So it's kind of a 3-part question. And the first data that you see on your screen refers to quality. And here you can see that yes, across the board, 92% of our participants believe that quality care exists in their community in Wisconsin. It was a slightly lower percent in the northeastern and northern regions, but by and large, people felt strongly that we do have quality care, and that's great news for our state. However, if I advance here to look at accessibility, the response to whether or not families can access that quality care was also quite definitive, but unfortunately, 92% of participants said that families cannot access quality care, even where it exists. The southeastern region had slightly better levels of access in that primarily urban part of our state, but all the regions were highly dissatisfied with access. Finally, affordability was the next pain point, and a whopping 95% of participants indicated that families cannot afford quality care, and all of the regions were at 90% above. Third, we asked questions about the impact of COVID-19 on early care and education, and what are the challenges of reopening or returning to care. And you can see those common themes here on your screen. Probably no major surprises there. Erin already alluded to a lot of these challenges. Finally, we merged our response to questions 4 and 5 about what ideas people have to improve early care and education and what supports would benefit early care and education into our framework categories. So our responses were analyzed for the trends across those different areas, and the overwhelming majority of answers responses discussed issues related to the workforce. That was the primary area of concern. And this related a lot to people's worries about wages, training, education, and staff retention, first above all. Participants were eager to see a lot of our creative energy spent in correcting some of those issues. An additional category emerged from this question that's not actually part of our framework, and that was around community. issues related to community connections with business collaboration, relationships across different sectors. And so I think that speaks really strongly to what we're here today to accomplish and to support across our field. And that's where you see these 200 responses all really valued and spoke to the importance of that collaboration. So last, before I leave you today, I'll just give you a high-level overview of our strategic planning process now that you're aware of some of the findings of our needs assessment. So in September, we have been working to draft and have in fact just shared internally the first draft of our statewide strategic plan based on the needs assessment findings. Throughout the months of September and October, we will be gathering stakeholder input on these strategic plan drafts. And that includes you. First and foremost, we would love to make sure that you feel invited and empowered to join in this conversation. I want you to save the date for October 7th, when we will be having a kickoff meeting, a virtual meeting to share the draft strategic plan and have some really rich discussions and building common understandings of equity and inclusion and how that can be impacted by this strategic plan over the next few years. So please plan to join us for that meeting if you can, and if not, for sure, take the survey that will be published on our website October 7th through 21st, so you can give input on the strategic plan. In November, we'll be finalizing and getting approvals on that plan. Regions will have the opportunity to build regional action plans aligned to the strategic plan later in the fall and submit innovation grant proposals. And finally, we will apply for funding to implement the strategic plan over the next 2 to 3 years. So I thank you again for your time, and I will now turn it back to Emily to introduce our next speaker.
Great, thank you, Andrea, and thanks for those great slides. I think it should come as no surprise, the slide that shows that overwhelmingly folks are interested in conversations that bridge early care and education or childcare with conversations about workforce development and economic development, so that kind of community tag. It should come as no surprise that we asked Caleb Rossman and Missy Hughes if they would comment really on kind of some of the work and conversation that they've been engaged in. Both have really taken a proactive touch to learning about this issue and thinking about how this issue intersects with their work. Caleb, I have the privilege of serving on his Council for Workforce Investment, CWI, and have been so thrilled with the amount of airtime the chair, Mark Tyler, and you, Secretary Frostman, have given to this issue around workforce development and childcare. So just invite you to say a few words on that topic, and thank you for coming today.
You bet. Well, thanks so much for having me. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. And I am always really glad to speak about and learn more about the intersection of workforce and quality early childhood education and childcare. And we talk about it a lot, as Secretary Amundsen mentioned, whenever we convene the Governor's Council on Workforce Investment. A constant theme is the necessity of quality, affordable childcare to our economy. It's interesting, I did not have a chance to see Aaron's presentation beforehand, but those 4 pieces are kind of the 4 pieces we always talk about. So it's great to see that alignment. That we're really grateful to have Secretary Amundsen come speak to our group, give us multiple presentations along with some colleagues about the importance of quality childcare to our workforce and to our state's long-term economic health. And when I've gone around the state and talked about numerous different things prior to COVID, one of them was childcare, and I kind of gave this personal anecdote that I grew up in a single parent household with my mom and sister, and as a single working parent working in the nonprofit sector, my mom was able to contribute to her work, be the parent my sister and I needed, mostly thanks in large part due to affordable quality childcare. And this is in 30 years ago, very, very different times, but was before or after school, over the summer, during breaks, she was able to put us in quality, affordable childcare. And able to save for a down payment on a home, build home equity, set aside a few bucks for retirement, and save for a portion of our college education. So essentially due to the accessibility, the affordability, and the quality of childcare at that time, she was realistically able to pursue the American dream. And that's an experience a single parent being able to participate fully in the workforce, who contribute to economic growth. That's driven me and my team to work closely with our partners like DCF, WEDC, to shout from the rooftops the importance and the impact that childcare accessibility and affordability has on our state's economy and our workforce. And I'm glad that the conversation has kind of gone both directions, how important it is for our greater workforce and our greater economy to have access to working parents, but also discussing what we can do for those working in childcare. We talk a lot about making sure that the work that we do results in a dignified wage that results in a high quality of life, hopefully better than the generation before. And so we've been strategizing with our partners to do all we can in that childcare space to try to increase those wages. And I think as I traveled the state prior to COVID and talked to stakeholders afterwards, it's pretty clear that the circumstances that I experienced 30 years ago are really not the reality for most parents today, as seen in the last couple of graphs, with 90+% of folks across Wisconsin not experiencing affordability or accessibility. And so when parents can't find childcare, when they can't afford it, or they can't depend on the quality of that childcare, it affects their ability as workers in our economy to fully participate in Wisconsin's workforce. It affects their ability to save for emergencies, to save for retirement, to invest in their home and their community, and accrue things like sick time and leave time, and to, as I said earlier, try to enjoy a quality of life that is better than the generation before. And for our employers, our childcare struggles can impede productivity. They can increase turnover, cause attendance or punctuality concerns, and hamstring their ability to recruit an adequate number of employees who remain out of the workforce as a result of the economic decision to stay home with children. So for our working parents, those chronic childcare concerns can hold back their professional growth and thus their income growth. Obviously, it's very important for us to focus on getting people in a job, period, but we also want to make sure we are focusing on helping people advance once they're already in the workforce. And when those parents aren't able to advance, that hold back our state's economy and our businesses that provide goods and services to those working parents. And from our perspective, those children in that childcare, we need to make sure we're providing the best development possible for all the reasons, but not the least of which is making sure we have a skilled workforce going forward. And as I mentioned at the outset, focusing on those who are currently working in childcare, we want to make sure we're working with our partners to pull every available lever to make sure that those that are doing this important work can earn dignified wages. And we're going to continue working with our partners to promote and invest in childcare and early education, because it offers unparalleled benefits in developing well-rounded, educated, adequately nurtured youth, as well as sets up our state's economy for long-term strength, resilience, and adaptability. And as everyone's mentioned thus far, obviously COVID added a new wrinkle to this work, but it also added a lot more urgency to make sure that we can support childcare providers as they work to keep their businesses afloat, as well as those families who are adjusting to new schooling and childcare arrangements. So with that, it's a real privilege to be here today, grateful to be part of this group, and looking forward to working together as we share the same goals to ensure that all Wisconsinites and their families have access to high quality, affordable childcare in this state, and for all the reasons I mentioned above. So looking forward to doing that work. Thanks so much for having me today, and looking forward to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you so much, Caleb. And I have to always remember that I like to invite Caleb to talk too when I have to make up a couple of extra minutes, because he's such a fast talker. So I really appreciate that too, Caleb. Thanks. So really, so much of what Secretary Frostman talked about in his remarks lines up so strongly with again that article that I sent out on the female recession, and to have just crossed over the 50% in the working economy threshold. Females now occupy 51% of the workforce, and yet we know and we find disproportionately that when childcare is scarce, or when quality is a question, or when affordability is an issue, women are disproportionately impacted by that. And this is something that Secretary and CEO Missy Hughes really caught on to, and we've had some really great spirited conversations about that piece around this sort of female recession, and talk about seeing the problem with new eyes. I've been so benefited by Secretary Hughes view on this issue, and sort of her background as both a mom and and somebody who spent a lot of time working and thinking about co-ops, and her approach to economic development as it relates to childcare. So thanks, Missy, for your thoughts on this topic. And Missy, if you're on, I cannot hear you. Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. So I want to just, first of all, thank you, Secretary Amundsen, for inviting me to be a part of the Leadership Council. When we had our first meeting back in February, of course, we had no idea what was headed towards us with COVID-19. And so the ability to have had that first meeting and then head into COVID-19 and understand the impact that it has on childcare and on the childcare industry has been really helpful from my perspective. It's kept it first and foremost in my mind. You know, and the other piece, I appreciated, Emily, at the beginning of the meeting, you highlighted the different hats that we wear, because often when I thought about early care, I thought about my children and my re-entry into the workplace. I had 3 kids under the age of 2. And I came at it from a very privileged position. The choices that I had to make were good choices, but they were still challenging choices, and it's still expensive, and the time and the energy involved in making sure that your children have affordable and accessible and especially quality care. Because if you're leaving them and you're going to work, you want to know that they're taken care of, and that they'll be happy and healthy when you pick them up at the end of the day. So, I often think about it from the parent side of you, and I have such empathy for parents who are facing the challenges that they are today of trying to get their work done and not having accessible care. And I'm really glad that mine are no longer all under the age of 2. But sitting here in my new role in economic development, I almost feel like I'm on the other side of the table. And as we went through COVID, I think it was like a mist cleared, and everybody was able to see how critically important it is to have good care for your children in order to be a productive part of the economy. That in order to have an economy that is rocking and rolling, you got to have childcare, and you have to be thinking about it. So as much as I think that we have this opportunity, and Emily and I have talked about it, like, how do we grab hold of this and take care of this opportunity? I worry that it's something that's going to slip through our hands if we don't really drive towards it, because parents are making decisions right now. Moms are making decisions right now. The challenge of a little one is that you can't, this isn't something that's going to happen 3 months from now. This isn't something that's going to unroll in 2 years. This is decisions that are being made right now. And it's really a challenge. So there's 2 things that I think about in this conversation that I want to just share that I've learned and pile onto the group. So the first thing is, I've had the opportunity to talk with a number of childcare providers and early care providers to understand the business model. And so, coming from the private sector and at Organic Valley, we had conversations about how to support local care providers, so that our employees could have access to care. We talked about starting our own. And I, even through all of those conversations, I didn't understand how difficult and unstable the business model is around childcare. You've got, you need to have the right teacher-child ratio. You need to have the teachers who are showing up every day. And, if you're paying them a low wage and they can have the opportunity to work someone nearby and make a higher wage with benefits, they're going to take advantage of that. And so, you're really challenged. And of course, this is really expensive for the parents. And even if you are able to access assistance for this, you're still making choices between, food security and your mortgage or your rent, and what to do about care. And so, and then as a provider, you're making lots of choices about capital investment and about where to pay yourself or to pay your employees. And so, just really learning and hearing the the different challenges that the providers have shared with me, we need to find solutions, but we also need to be talking to businesses about those solutions, because as Kayla pointed out, if you want to have a workforce, if you want to have folks who are able to have, consistently show up day in, day out, then they need to have good care for their children. And so there's a real business role here, but businesses also need to understand that they need to support the childcare model, because just thinking, oh, it's going to I'll tell you, in my experience, we just thought, oh, that happens. That's a business there. Parents drop off their kids and it's all working. Well, it's not working. And that's why we're seeing the lowering of capacity. And so, one of my goals is to really continue to talk to businesses about it and to really highlight it. And I want to share a story. I was talking with one of the fantastic CEOs that I've been able to develop a relationship with. And I reached out to him a couple of weeks ago just to talk about the unrest that we were seeing and how things are going. And I, asked him, what are you really focusing on? And, his focus and some of the other businesses that he's in touch with are focused on developing talent and upskilling and, looking at their workforce. They're focused on investing on other businesses, and they're focused on their own business. And he said, so that's what we're really focused on. And I said, well, can I talk to you about childcare? And I explained to him the challenges that we're facing with a loss in capacity, and that it's been a long time trend. And I said point blank to him, this means that women are going to be leaving the workplace. They are typically paid less. And when choices are made in the household, it is women who end up staying home. And he literally had a light bulb go off for him, because he said, when I talk to a business who wants to grow, the first thing I tell them to do is to hire women, because women in the workplace help businesses grow. And if you're telling me, Missy, that we're going to lose women in the workplace, we have a real problem. And it was a great conversation for me, but I was like, okay, I shouldn't have to be telling you this. And so we have to think about, and I will continue my work to continue to tell that story. But that's the second really urgent challenge that we need to think about, is right now we are losing women in the workplace, and it is going to be devastating for the advances that we've made. I said to Emily recently, my mother is rolling over in her grave right now, thinking about all the work that she did to become a doctor and to raise 7 children, and to know that it's going to be hard for women to continue to follow in her footsteps to get out into the workplace. And so this isn't only work that I'm doing for you, Secretary, and for you, Governor. I'm doing this work for my mother also, to try to continue to talk about how we need to find solutions. We need to find innovative solutions to relieve the stress of this, to unlock this ability in our economy to move forward. And first and foremost, to take care of the women who are challenged to have to make really hard choices every day, and the parents who are making hard choices, and how we can support that. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Missy. That was so powerful. And, I chuckle at this story. If people wonder, boy, how did I make it into this meeting, or why did I get this invite? I think the fact that Missy a few weeks ago touched on childcare in some remarks she was making in the Milwaukee area. And we all laughed, because the next day it was like the headline in the Milwaukee Business Journal: Secretary Hughes talks about childcare. And, I feel like I've been talking about childcare all day, every day, but they expect me to talk about childcare. It's unexpected when the economic development CEO stands up and waves the flag around childcare. And so if for no other reason than, you find a story that you can take to a new sector, a new industry, and wave that flag, it really does make a splash when we use those bully pulpits or those positions of authority to bring new messages to new groups. So I thank you for that, Missy. And I just want to remind folks, so we've got one more sort of mini presentation, and then we'll kick it into that discussion where I'm really asking you to look at the problem with new eyes and ask yourselves the question: I wonder if anyone has thought about trying blank. I wonder if anyone is doing this. and still be collecting those questions or comments in response to some of what you've heard this morning from these wonderful presenters. So last today, I asked Director Linda Hall, Director of the Office of Children's Mental Health, to come and give light to some of the connecting the dot work that she does each and every day. Her really the sole purpose for the Office of Children's Mental Health is to connect some of the programs and some of the policies and some of the work around children and their families. And she does such a great job of providing that connector role to a number of state agencies, and we really appreciate her efforts. So I wanted her to shine a light on some of those connect the dot projects that she's been doing at the nexus of this conversation. So Linda, all yours.
Thank you, Secretary Amundson. I appreciate that that introduction and connecting of dots to why I wanted to speak to this group today, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it. I will be brief, but I do want to connect some dots. I wanted to make sure you were filled in on the kind of approach we're taking to our work right now, and to ask you for some help in terms of giving us input on an environmental scan that we're currently conducting. So if I could have the next slide. This is just our Office of Children's Mental Health, as you may know, is our primary responsibility is to coordinate among agencies initiatives to improve the children's mental health system. And so when I was talking with Secretary Amundson about this, I said, gee, it would be great, since those people are at this table, if we could have, you know, a few minutes here instead of calling a separate meeting, that would be terrific. So with the next slide, you can see that this is our agenda for the year, and we have decided to, for 2020, and we'll probably carry this into 2021, we're looking at key points along the lifespan of a child and looking at how can we build strong emotional well-being. And it's really, I really appreciate being able to follow Secretary Hughes, because if you look at the 0 to 5 range, we have really been looking at, in conjunction with the First Lady, looking at how can we have an influence on what's happening to children in the 0 to 5 range, and how can we be a support in terms of getting communities and business to think about their support for early childcare, because we know that a lot of issues that mental health issues that become evident for children are exhibited in childcare. They're exhibited as behaviors, where kids are showing us through their behaviors what they what's going on with them in terms of their emotional well-being. So I won't go into more detail about this. You can find this on our website. It's also part of our annual report. But we really are looking at the social determinants of health and what are these key points along the way to a child's development, and how can we together have a positive influence. So, but as we wanted to do this, we wanted to get an idea of you know, what are some ways we could measure progress in these 4 different areas? And so we wanted to go and look at and see what is going on already. Look in our environment. What are people already up to? And in fact, what we're in process of doing is reinstituting something that our office did a few years ago, which was to do a very detailed scan of all the programs that relate to children's mental health, all the funding, so that everybody could see it in one place. And so now we're doing this for 2 reasons. One is to hopefully identify a couple of measures for each of those 4 areas that we can monitor to see if we're making progress. And 2, to create opportunities for people to see what others are up to and how they might collaborate. And we know from our previous experience of doing this kind of initiative that we had new collaborations across departments that have really contributed to improvements in the children's mental health system. So this is the thing that I really wanted to alert you to and get your input on either today. I'll send this out. I'll send the whole document out later. But because I want to know that we are creating a comprehensive document that fairly represents, important things that are going on. So the document, which is it's organized as a PowerPoint, shows primarily for DCF, DHS, and DPI ongoing initiatives. And then it shows for child serving agencies, so those are non-governmental agencies, it shows grants over $100,000 that are focused on children's mental health. It also addresses state councils and some other cross agency collaborations. So if you go to the next slide, you'll get to see what the document itself looks like. So I've given you a couple examples here that shows that. So at the top, we've got an initiative by DCF, Family and School Together Initiative. It identifies who is the leader of this, the Division of Early Care and Education. Are there other state agencies involved? The next column is, are there implementation sites to pay particular attention to? Then there's a description of that initiative, and then the amount of funding that's available. And in almost every case, we have a website for you to go to look for more information. And and we do the similar thing with child serving agencies and with statutorily required councils that relate to children's mental health. So what I'm looking for from all of you is to help us identify whether we've missed anything, whether we have portrayed anything inaccurately, and then we hope that we will carry this through. We will encourage conversation around it and hope that we can together find new opportunities to collaborate and to find new ways to improve our children's mental health system. So I'll follow up with you on that later. But then there are a couple of other things that we are engaged in right now that have been really fun for us and really exciting. And the first one is the feelings thermometer, which First Lady Kathy Evers was so kind to do a video of, and you can access the feelings thermometer and the First Lady's video on our website. We decided to put this out. I was working with a child psychiatrist at UW Health, and she told me about this feelings thermometer, and then together we created one that's really specific for us and to the situation this year with COVID-19. So and we decided, okay, well, we'll print some of these in a magnet form so people can put it on their refrigerator. Within 24 hours from the First Lady's video, we had over 30,000 requests for the feeling thermometer. It's just off the charts. We have had to limit how many we're giving out, but we are still distributing some, and it's available to print on our website. So it's been something that mushroomed in a way we couldn't have imagined, but we're also getting some really great feedback in terms of how people are using it and it's helping. And interestingly, it's not just people working with young children. We've had even people working with the elderly at ADRCs are saying that they're using this with their families too. So, and then with the next slide, I wanted to share with you that we have been holding listening sessions also. We have had 2 listening sessions, especially around youth, for them to talk with us about their mental health and what they think is important in terms of mental health and what kind of support they need. You may know that our office is very committed to working with people with lived experience. So we have young people with lived experience who are actually leading these sessions. And the exciting part for us now is that one of our work groups, our collective impact work group on resiliency, has decided that their focus for this year and next will be just to support the young people in carrying out the action agenda that they identify. So we are marching off into new territory that we will be youth-led around this, and it's very exciting. And we have many of you are partners with us in this, especially DPI. So then my last slide is that I wanted to share with you that one of these young people is also our marketer, and she created all of these memes to put on to advertise the event on social media. So we're excited about that. we're excited about getting their voice in there, and they're telling us things that we wouldn't have known otherwise. So always good to check in with your community to see if you're seeing things that the way they are. And maybe this we can tie this back to what Secretary Amundsen started us out with as, can you come to these challenges with new eyes and come up with new ideas on how to work on them. So thanks very much for the time to present these ideas to you. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. And thanks for your collaboration and the important work that you do. I think we all can learn something from the charge of the Office of Children's Mental Health, which is so much this coordinating body. For those of you that don't know, it's housed within the Department of Health Services, but its charge is really to connect so many programs, and so we really appreciate Linda's collaborative approach to the work. And certainly, it's been fun to work with First Lady Kathy Evers this year on a number of projects that bridge Linda's space, DCF space, DPI space. So thanks for that. So now's the part in the meeting where if you're in a comfy place and you want to click on that camera, go for it. If you'd like to unmute, that would be great. And just looking to try to get a little bit of a conversation going at the nexus of that quote that I kind of shared, that idea of not seeking new landscapes necessarily, but in having new eyes. And that's really part of the task at hand here for the Leadership Council on Early Years, is to bring your lived experience and bring your communities and bring your industries into this space to think about this a little differently. I'm also just looking for comments, questions, reactions to what we've heard this morning. And it would be very uncouth of me to not invite our governor and First Lady to have any words or to kick off our discussion this morning with questions or comments. So, Governor, anything you want to point us toward?
Well, first of all, great presentations by everybody, and it does cause me to continue. And this is obtuse, Emily. So if this is not what you're looking for, just ignore it. But I keep thinking about connecting the dots and what in the whole issue of a service being or a system being a public good and offered in the private sector, and how different public goods and privately provided sectors succeed. And Randy may be on the line, I'm not sure, from the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Protection, but I just think about food, system of providing good food and nutritious food, how that works. It's obviously a public good, and frankly, as a state and a nation, not that many people starve to death. And so, we certainly subsidize many of our farmers from the front end with so that they can provide, so they can make a living and provide food for us to eat. Clearly, the processors are regulated by both the state and federal government, and there are food deserts, just as there are deserts for childcare. Not as much, I would suggest, but there are. And so the processes are regulated. The grocery stores are regulated. The people that work in grocery stores are considered essential workers. And then, at the end of the day, we have a pretty good system. It obviously doesn't work because we have food banks to provide food for free to folks. But I always think this way, and are there other systems? I just mentioned food. You could look at housing in the same way. Where do the subsidies come in? How successful we are? Even as ludicrous as energy. Obviously, that's a public good. It's all provided by. It is all provided by the private sector, but it is heavily regulated by the state and federal government, primarily the state with the Public Service Commission, who guarantees companies that are regulated, which is all of them, a profit. And so are there things that we can learn from other sectors that might help us understand the best way to make sure that this public good, that in the past was not considered a public good, but it is now, thrives in a better way. And I'll just end my comments on one thing around COVID and how that's impacted. And I was watching CNN one night, and here was they're talking about going to what's happening with our K through 12 schools. And on one side, I think was Anderson Cooper, and the other side was a union leader. And they're both jabbering back and forth about how unfair it is to teachers and kids as it relates to how this is going to work in schools during a pandemic. And in the middle was an African-American woman who kept trying to get a word in edgewise. And she finally said, you two are talking about it here. Here's my world. My world is I worked damn hard over the last couple of years I can't remember, I think she's a respiratory therapist or something in the health world. And she said, I have to go to work. I have a child. Tell me how I'm going to be able to do this if I can't send that child to school. And the two on the side absolutely ignored what she was saying, and she had to actually repeat it 2 or 3 times, and finally she kind of gave up. But it just reminds me that schools aren't childcare providers, but they do serve that role in many cases, and how unfortunately we don't listen to the consumer a lot around this. And so I was pleased to see the survey work and all that, but we have to keep that woman that I saw on the TV that night in our hearts and our thoughts going forward. So that's I know that's rambling. I apologize, Emily, but you should have expected it.
Thank you, Governor. And it's not at all outside of the realm of the conversation that I hope to be having. Unfortunately, Randy was on, and he just had to jump off just a few minutes ago. He'll be delighted that that you made the connection over to another industry, and that's exactly the kind of thinking that I'm hoping to do with this council. Anybody else have that similar thought to Governor about analogous industries? Because that's something that I scratch my head about a lot, of why sort of the collective social infrastructure has the stomach to subsidize one private industry and not necessarily another private industry. And this is something that I heard a lot when we were fighting for for any funding with the federal government, with state government. It's like, yeah, but why would we prop up a private sector entity? Everybody's hurting. Why are they any different? And so, sort of interested in people's perceptions about either analogous industries or sort of how do you cross that bridge over to absolutely childcare as a public good? Like, what does it take to sort of turn that page? Any thoughts on that from the group?
Emily, this is Missy. If I may, I think I would build on the governor's comments, especially thinking about agriculture and farming, that a challenge within that system is the drive to make everything cheaper. So whether it's cheap food or cheap energy or cheap care, then you devalue the providers, right? So the farmers don't get paid the value that they need to be able to sustain themselves, and the care providers don't get the value that they need to sustain themselves. So there's I just wanted to highlight that piece in there, that somehow we have to recognize the value that public good, as the governor so amazingly put it, is bringing to our lives, and recognize that value.
Thanks, Missy. Other thoughts? Go ahead, Linda.
Linda, I just think that we're at this moment where I think there are more people open to seeing the world as more interconnected, and that we're all interconnected. Not everybody is there, but I think more people are open to that idea. And this is a point in time where we could really, if we can be creative about how do we foster that thinking and help people make those connections between childcare and growing small business, which people do care about, can we foster new, different conversations, or will people be more open to them, and how do we take advantage of that?
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts, just in general response to speakers, either thoughts, questions from this group? I used to be a teacher, so I'm just going to practice my wait time for a second here.
I would just say to the governor's comments, Secretary Amundson, just that, I think that's a really good analogy. And we've tried throughout the course of the last year and a half to talk in general terms about the things that make strong commerce possible for everyone. And that includes things like public goods, like broadband, like roads, like education. But childcare absolutely falls into that same category of what makes strong commerce possible for big business, small business entrepreneurs. And so we've been trying to tie that together so folks can connect those dots and see that this really is, whether it's in the private sector or elsewhere, it's a public good that it's good for its own sake, but also for economic growth. So trying to make that pitch and continue to talk about those pieces of what we would call economic infrastructure, and childcare is a big piece of that infrastructure. So we continue to try to make that pitch, but kind of drawing it into that sense of what obviously allows people to go back into the workforce but be successful when they're there. I think it resonates, to Secretary Hughes' point with her conversation with the CEO. If you mention those two words, people do light up right away.
Absolutely. Thanks, Caleb.
And Emily, I'm going to jump back in here. Apologize. And maybe it's not what we can learn from other systems, but how we can piggyback on other systems. You think about affordable housing. I mean, that is a public good. I mean, housing is a public good, no matter how you slice it. Obviously, we struggle with that, but at the end of the day, we do create affordable housing in the state of Wisconsin, and it works out pretty well. Obviously the president only wants it in certain places, but the rest of us are pretty cool with the idea of having it do just about any place. And so it might be time to marry two public goods, housing and childcare, and making sure that anybody that gets a subsidy around the issue of affordable housing must provide space for childcare in that development. And so there's just so many systems in place that either we can learn from or first of all, as you said, help people understand that childcare is a public good. And second of all, and that is a big first step, but I think we're getting there. But second of all, how we can kind of marry some of those other systems at certain places. and share thinking, and frankly share some of the burden of the cost.
I see Joaquin popping in, and I knew you were gonna bite on this one, Joaquin, because I've heard you say similar things in the past. So you go.
Jump on video, but I'm having issues. You won't hear me well, so forgive me. I'm gonna just take off video. Can you hear me well?
You sound like you're talking in a tin can, but I think we can roll with you a little bit.
Sorry about that. So, thank you, Governor. I do want to add to that conversation is that as of recently, I had the privilege of being involved in conversation as to kind of the scoring system for our tax credits that build housing. And as a part of that, what we're trying to do is move further in the direction where we're just not building for building and housing people, but understanding how housing has an impact on the neighborhood around it, and the services that are provided along with housing, multifamily housing. And so to really add to the connecting of the dots that has been started by our governor is the fact that see now the way that we will incentivize developers to think a lot harder and for us to see projects that will think about services, social services that are provided to the tenants. And what we're seeing is a good amount of our tenants have children. They are younger. There's a larger percentage. And so I think that's going to be very exciting for us to see come the next round how that is official. And if it doesn't come to fruition, what we're doing is making sure that through this process and going forward is that we're showing our developers case studies nationwide of successful models as to how do you support the constituents and or the tenants, the people that live in these homes.
Joaquin, we're kind of losing you now, but I think we got a good taste of where you were going. And I think just to summarize for folks that were having a hard time hearing Joaquin, I know he's done a lot of work on the grant opportunities that WIDA puts out and trying to cross-pollinate to those agencies that do provide a public good. And still one of my favorite days that I've ever had as secretary was a meeting that Joaquin and I attended of all childcare providers in the Milwaukee area. And he just fired them right up with some of his comments at the nexus of housing development and childcare. And I think, some of the data that he's citing and looking at to show who is taking advantage of the projects that WIDA funds, what percentage of them do have children. These are really important, again, cross-sectional metrics that we ought to be looking at as well. Other thoughts from this conversation?
Emily, this is Peter Barca. And just one point, and I hope I'm not taking this too far astray, but when the governor talked about affordability, it kind of hit me in a way because, working very closely with the child care providers in my district in the legislature in the Kenosha-Racine area, the one arena that just was so difficult and it's hard for providers, it's also hard for families, are those people who have children with disabilities. It's much more costly and, the demands on families are much greater. And so, I think that's one piece of the puzzle that, as someone that's worked with people with disabilities over the years and are near and dear to my heart, I'm just hoping that we can analyze that segment to some degree. I believe you toured Every Child's Place, which is between the Kenosha and Racine area, connected with the Gateway campus, and they're having a hard time just surviving right now financially, but families, it's accentuated even further because in many cases it's 24/7 care. And so again, I apologize if I'm a little bit off base. I had to join a little bit late. I had a commitment in the Capitol, so I joined probably halfway through.
Peter, thank you so much for being on. It's great to hear your voice as always. I do want to invite either Aaron or Barb Van Haren to to comment on Peter's comment, because I know both of you are fierce advocates for the same concern that Peter raised. Barb, it looks like you jumped off mute.
I am. I was going to let Erin go first if she wants to start with the young children, and then I can certainly chime in.
Looks like Erin might be having a hard time getting off mute.
I was going to say, I'll go ahead, Erin. I think it looks like, okay.
She's off.
Yep.
She's off.
I apologize. So what's interesting, I'm so glad you brought this up, because really children with disabilities, in addition to children who are experiencing homelessness, children who are speak languages other than English. So there's so many children, but I agree, children with disabilities are really at the forefront of the work that we do, our vulnerable populations. And we need to be very intentional. We have heard time and time again that you're absolutely right. It is difficult for parents to find care, to afford that care, to find that high quality care, and in the workforce to support those children. And so we want to be very intentional about being inclusive, about being thoughtful, and about really ensuring that we are connecting the dots across with DPI in the special education space, with Department of Health Services, in the birth to 3 space, with the Office of Children's Mental Health, et cetera. There's a lot of dots to connect here, but we need to look at it from a systems perspective and in the policy perspective as well, to make sure that we are doing our best to support young children and families now and as they transition into the K-12 system. Barb,
thanks. Yeah, I will echo those sentiments, and I am so pleased to have this issue raised because it is critical. I think the COVID right now has amplified the difficulties that we're seeing for families, for our students with IEPs, with disabilities, in terms of not only accessing childcare, out of school care, as well as just not being able to access their specially designed instruction and the related services such as physical and occupational therapy, speech, etc., in virtual environments, and how we have been having conversations to help provide those different opportunities, and really looking at the need for across continuum options for our families with students with IEPs so that they are able to access, and what that means in person, if it needs to be virtual, if it needs to be some combination there within. I know we're currently having conversations with our out of school providers and trying to build muscle around how to provide really quality services for students with disabilities who are in out of school programs. And actually I'm meeting with our CLC group next week to help just that. How do we kind of build that capacity so that providers have the skills and are feeling comfortable being able to provide services to students with disabilities along the way. So I really appreciate that comment. Again, it crosses many varied aspects across this work group, and I'm really glad for the opportunity to comment on that.
Thanks for bringing that up. And again, I used to be a teacher, so I'm not shy about calling on people, and I would love to hear, I'm looking at Sarah Meany, I'm looking at Craig Thompson, I'm looking at Joel Brennan, I'm looking at Joel Milsistune, and I'm going like, what the heck are you guys doing on a call about early care and education? Are you, what's going on? Like, how are you kind of connecting the dots, I guess, to this conversation? And I'm not trying to be flippant. I'm really curious if there's something that you can latch onto in this conversation to take back to your industry or sector.
Emily, can I start? This
Sure,
is Joel.
Joel.
Go ahead, Joel. So, I mean, just a couple things that I think are kind of rattling around for me. One, you know, and you and your agency are part of this in the conversations we're having as an administration, but we're at this inflection point as an employer, as a state, with where we're going in terms of telecommuting and remote work. And that is, you know, the article you sent out bears out some of the impact and the influence that COVID-19 has had on women and had on women in the workforce. But as an employer of 35,000 people in the state and the UW with a similar amount, you know, and in my department, you know, as you're aware and as you guys are talking about, what the long-term implications of that are for the state's real estate portfolio, what that's going to look like for people, what, you know, we're going to have potentially excess real estate that either we're going to get rid of or more productively used. And I think, you know, one of the things you've talked about as we're envisioning where we're going forward, is there a way to integrate childcare even into that? You know, what, in all the ways that may work. So that's one of the areas I think that we, as an employer, as hopefully, you know, as we look at trying to be an employer of choice, as we're trying to be leaders, what we're going to be doing is going to have an impact. So in so many cases, we trail behind what the private sector does. Can we step out and be a leader on some of those things? I think some of the productive conversations we can continue to have. The other thing that I'm just thinking of, you know, is you and the stakeholders you work with, even when it comes down to like the CARES funding and the coronavirus relief funding, you know, you always operate in a position of scarcity, and you have been successful. The first $50 million you got in CARES funding, it went right out the door. You got another, you know, allocation of that you'll be able to do. And I think that's part of that is born of the success, and you're finding ways, I think, for people to agree that this is a public good and that this is a hugely important issue at the nexus of education and economic development. I guess part of what I'm also thinking is, what if we win the argument? What if, you know, Joe Biden has suggested that he would spend $320 billion over 10 years. The industry says it's a $50 billion problem. Do we have the infrastructure and the capacity, if we win the argument, to be able to efficiently and effectively deploy those resources? And that's you know, talk about connecting the dots. That's across the whole enterprise and across all kinds of different agencies. But you know, but you operate in this environment of scarcity, and all of us who have worked in the childcare, early childhood education area know that there are so many ways in which scarcity it reigns. What if we have an opportunity at some point to have, well, it won't be largesse. This is probably just kind of the ability to get to a point where we can be similar to other areas. Do we have the infrastructure and the capacity to do that? I mean, it's a great problem to have, but are we ready to do that if we win? If we win the rhetorical, the political arguments, all those battles, are we ready to actually, you know, do the things that we need to do? So those are the things that are kind of jumping around in my head, and that's part of the reason why, you know, again, I think this is a relevant conversation for anybody in any of our agencies. You picked out a handful of us. You know, there could be anyone else amongst the cabinet agencies or non-cabinet agencies for which this would be absolutely relevant, as Missy and Caleb were able to outline earlier in the call.
Thanks so much, Joel. Craig, you want to jump in here?
Emily, thanks. And I was about to, even before you called on me, I was going to put my hand up. But really, two things. This has been really, really informative and illuminating morning for me. And two of the things that really, I think, stick out to me, one of them Joel just hit on, and that's from the standpoint as a large employer, how we can integrate some of these things to make us a better employer of choice, to make us more competitive, and obviously to improve the situation for people with young children and for those children. So as an employer, it's one, but the second one really is I know Caleb and Missy, I was thinking about as they were talking, and they know we've been trying to spend a lot of time, not as successfully as we'd like to be, but making the case for why public transit is so important for connecting people in underserved areas to jobs. And I'm thinking that maybe we haven't done as good of a job as we need to about making that exact same argument with childcare. And we've been trying to document it with jobs, and we've been, that public transit is just absolutely a critical lifeline of access to jobs. And, I'm not sure that, it's a lot more in my mind now that we've got to make that exact same argument with access to childcare as well, because they go hand in hand. So I guess those are my thoughts.
That's awesome, Craig. I want to jump out of my chair to hear you talk about some of those things. That's very cool. And I know I saw Aaron kind of jumping around too, getting excited about that. Missy, it looks like you want to jump in.
Oh, I'm just excited about what Craig said, because one of the most impactful conversations I had was just hearing about how difficult it is to manage your child moving from one childcare to the next because of the 12-hour requirement, and you're working a shift here, you need to leave work, get your child onto public transportation, drop them off at another care center. And, so thinking, I mean, like, if we were super progressive, we'd be thinking about how to make that work for children moving through the transportation system, or parents moving children through the transportation system. And as if we're lucky enough to build care facilities, let's put them near public transportation, or let's move the public transportation near them. So I think that's, like, Craig, it was heartbreaking to me to imagine the stress of the parents having to move kids around to get from one care facility to the other. And so I just really appreciate your saying that.
Yeah, that's great. And the number of stories that we've collected about families that make the difficult decision to drive an hour, out of their way twice a day to drop off kids because of that scarcity that Aaron talked about in terms of early care and education centers. And speaking as somebody who had a lot of drop-offs and pickups in my very recent past, and then to go into an environment where all of a sudden everybody's at home all the time, I just can't tell you what a stress release that has been for me personally, to not have the kind of just vast driving responsibility to pick up kids and drop off kids from high quality care. And I live in in an urban area. Folks who are living out in rural areas are really challenged in that environment. So I want to invite anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak or to provide a perspective on this to jump in as we start to wind down here. Rebecca, it looks like you might have jumped in.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't have much to add other than preaching to the choir. Much like Secretary Amundsen said, it's really nice when we have kind of non-traditional spokespeople, messengers talk about early care, strengthening families, and childcare. As an agency that's charged with kind of connecting the dots, not the language in the statute, but connecting the dots on strengthening families, we always talk about what are the conditions that are needed in a community to strengthen families so children can thrive. And that's everything that people have talked about, right? The CDC talks about secure housing, access to affordable food, enrichment in childcare, including family engagement and family support, and transportation. So just really wanted to mention preaching to the choir, not much to jump in on there. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Rebecca. Any other last thoughts from council participants today?
This is Tracy Luber. I'm with WEDC under Missy. I'm one of the regional economic development directors for Southeast Wisconsin. I'm also on the board of COA Youth and Family Centers in Milwaukee, which has 2 early childhood centers. And one thing they talk about is in regards to the shortage of childcare workers, that it's often difficult for people to pay for the certification which is required before they can even apply. So there's, as we discussed earlier, the turnover and the low pay, but also this idea of possibly being able to provide some type of incentive to help cover the cost of the certification so that we can recruit more people into child care centers in terms of workforce.
Thank you, Tracy. And I'm wondering if, Aaron, if you wanted to speak to that briefly, because that is absolutely a piece of this preschool development grant puzzle, both existing and then in future state.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought it up. So as one, there's a couple of pieces that I'll touch on related to the certification. There are two programs, one in particular, I should say, that's available that focuses on scholarship money to ensure people do have that certification. It's something that we have increased with our preschool development funds. Additionally, we are looking at ways to really strengthen that education and certification pipeline, both from, and historically this has been a program that has come out of high schools in IHGs. And so as a high schooler, you can get engaged in early care and education and actually take for credit some of that coursework. And then it kind of transfers on if folks are interested in an associate's degree, et cetera. So we're working with institutes of higher education and others to really look at how do we provide that coursework, provide opportunities, whether it's, in the future in person, virtual right now, et cetera, so that we can support, so that we are able to support the workforce. We also have another initiative, our Leading Men Fellows, that are really looking to take young high school men who are in more of the Southeast region and to begin to expose them to early care and education in field. And I think a lot of this stems on really salary, wage, and compensation. There's some significant issues with what we actually pay our teachers and it not being a livable wage. And so connecting the dots there so that we're able to truly pay providers and teachers for the important work that they are doing in children's lives.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah. Anybody else? Last call for comments, questions, seeing the universe with new eyes. All right. Well, if I could get Andrea to put back up the slide deck, we'll go ahead and close out this meeting. So from a logistics perspective, so we've been listening really intently to the discussion today, and are very grateful for some of the insights shared today. The acknowledgement that, obviously the state of Wisconsin is a significant employer, 35,000 employees, close to 70,000 if we count UW System. I think we ought to be thinking about this from an employer standpoint as well. I know personally from my own perspective, there's not a week that goes by where we're not having a conversation about how we can be accommodating to our staff, our workforce at DCF during this uncertain time, as we're seeing school districts pivot back and forth between virtual learning and in-person learning. The acknowledgement that we need to continue to be flexible as organizations is felt very strongly. But I think that we need to understand that every time there is one of those pivots out in a community, that has an impact on this early care and education piece of the puzzle. And it's very likely that you have employees in your own agency or your own department that are scratching their heads going, I don't know what I will do if we go to virtual learning. And so just the acknowledgement that this absolutely touches us as the heads of agencies and as executive leadership in state agencies. I want to just highlight one. Effort that we are working on through our preschool development grant process, So next slide, Andrea, just to show you a little bit of what we're spending these dollars on. We have a campaign around celebrating early care and education that's happening currently. And we will be sending out these yard signs as part of our PPE deliveries that we'll begin making in the near future. We also have an online sort of Facebook system set up to be able to thank an early care and education professional. And that's just been a really wonderful shot in the arm again for these folks that have been working so incredibly hard during the pandemic. So if there is somebody in your life that you want to thank, you can absolutely access those tools through our website. I want to thank everybody, in particular, obviously, Governor and First Lady, thank you so much for your time today. Secretary Frostman and Secretary Hughes and Director Hall, thank you so much for the extra time that you spent preparing for presentation. And then for all of my colleagues who are just so fantastic. I'm really excited to be able to do a leadership council like this with all of you, and to know that when you show up and you give it your full heart and your full brain. It's just a privilege to do this work with you. So thanks for that. Thanks for taking the time. We want to do another one of these meetings, probably late 2020 or early 2021, and we'll work with your staff. If something that we said or talked about today you want to follow up with us on, my line is open. Can't wait to talk to you, and we'll go from there and continue this collaboration. So thank you so much. Enjoy a couple extra minutes here, and maybe make like a slightly larger sandwich as a result of some extra time back to you today. Thanks everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Emily.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Great session.